Shalom, family, and thank you so much for joining us for this week's weekly news update. I pray that wherever you are blessed and walking in the Barakah of Elohim, wherever you may be. And so thankful for all of you who are joining us here today. Uh, Sorry for the slight delay. We seem to always have a little challenge with some technical difficulties. So thank you for your patience and your grace as we put these together. And these are something that we do once a week, and we don't do these all the time. I know there's a lot of other people out there doing a lot of updates all the time, and one of the challenges with that, and the results seem to be that people didn't tend to disconnect from any information because it's overwhelming. And so this is one of the challenges that we try to avoid. One of the things that we like to say around here is we like to be informed without being overwhelmed. We like to take the 10,000 foot view as we look at news and things, current events as they unfold in light of Bible prophecy. And so this is what we're reviewing with. And again, doing it too often causes anxiety. I've talked to so many people, I can't even tell how many people have said to me, I disconnected from the news entirely. It just became too much. And that is just as dangerous as being over inundated. And so taking this time to do these reviews, I believe, is the correct pace, if you will, for us so that we don't have that difficulty. And we do have a website that we put all of our links on. So we do encourage you to join us there at remnantwatch.com. That's remnantwatch.com. And that's a labor of love. You're going to find that we put these stories on there. And essentially, we're doing it so that it's easy for you to keep track of the things that are going on. And you'll notice there's no advertising and, pop-ups and all that stuff in your way. And so that becomes, I think, a good resource and something that makes it easy to sort of scan, catch up on what's happening without having to get too caught up in the details of each story. But if you want to look at the articles there, the links will work. And on that note, let's get into the news. And tonight's top story, there is, of course, more and more saber rattling. I don't know what else you want to say that, but there's definitely some saber rattling going on throughout the Middle East. And so we do have to be very careful with that and understand that this is a time period when the scripture is being fulfilled. And so Israel and Hezbollah have begun to exchange heavy fire in a major escalation. Now, one of the things that we took a look at and we were paying attention to for some time was the fact that they were starting this second front, this front on the northern border of Israel at the same time that they had the Gaza efforts and so forth. And so they're shifting over now, as we anticipated and predicted. They're shifting over to the Gaza, or from the Gaza warfare, if you will, over to Hezbollah, and that is off the northern coast of Israel. Israel has said it's carried out a wave of preemptive strikes across southern Lebanon, which of course is just north of Israel, to thwart a large-scale rocket and drone attack by Hezbollah. Jets destroyed thousands of the Iran-backed armed group's rocket launchers on Sunday morning, Israel's military said. Hezbollah and its Amal allies said 3 fighters had been killed. Hezbollah said it still managed to fire 320 rockets and drones at Israel in retaliation, so they didn't quite get them all, for the assassination of senior commander. According to Israeli military, 1 Israeli Navy soldier was killed. And so we are seeing an increase of barrages going back and forth in the theater of the Middle East. And the news on the ground, as I was beginning to look at some of the human interest stories going on in Israel, just some of the background information, things happening on the ground, and what it clearly appears to be that the vast majority of those who are mobile, who had the financial means to do so, are exiting this theater. And so Israel is becoming more and more deserted by the day. People are leaving and getting out of that place where warfare seems to be inevitable. And this, of course, is something that we do know. The scripture does warn us about. And so we do see these things coming in. the world is paying attention. So every time these things occur, we're again, the danger is who's going to be called the good guy, who's going to be called the bad guy. Remember, this is a little battle of high ground. The Israeli military launch would have called the preemptive strikes on Hezbollah and Lebanon as the Iran-backed military who said it carried out its own attacks. Now, this is one of the challenges here is who's going to have the high ground. After all, Israel is calling it a preemptive attack, which means I'm going to hit you before I think you're going to hit me. So I'm going to commit a crime before you commit the crime because I think you might commit the crime. Again, somebody's still going to have to explain to me at some point here. One of you will have to sit down and explain to me the wonderful virtues of a bomb and what value it brings to bringing shalom anywhere in the earth. So this is getting very scary for especially those in the theater of operation. But I do believe that this could have the potential to send the entire world into conflict. And as a matter of fact, as you recall, one of the things that we talked about last week was that Erdogan, the president of Turkey, made a very bold statement and said, we will not allow Israel to engulf the region in flame. And as a matter of fact, just this last week, he did meet with the president of Egypt, which is on, of course, Israel's western border, right? So Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is expected to pay his first visit to Ankara on September 4th, or so he's meeting with him. Sorry about that. I thought it was already happening, but apparently it's about to happen, according to sources cited by multiple news outlets. So the ongoing war in Gaza is expected to dominate the discussions as talks will focus on joint efforts to halt Israeli military actions in Gaza and establish a ceasefire. So there's a lot of energy pushing against any further incursions into Gaza. But because the narrative of war is so important for whatever these warmongers are doing, they are just going to switch theaters of operation. So you're going to go from one war threat, if you live in Israel, to another war threat. There's just there isn't going to be an elimination of that. And I do believe that of all the people that should be prayed for, the people living in Israel are the most terrorized of all because they are subject directly to these policies and ideas. And again, war seems to be perpetual. And of course, North Korea is boosting its capabilities as it prepares for conflict, and it boosts its military cooperation with Russia. And so this is boding poorly, of course, for the world powers, the hegemonic powers as they be, because this is beyond their control. Following a recent visit by Russian military officials, North Korea has decided to strengthen its military ties with Russia. An anonymous source in Pyongyang told Daily NK on Monday that North Korea's leadership has ordered increased cooperation with Russia on weapons development. This decision came after a meeting between North Korea leader Kim Jong-un and Russian Deputy Defense Minister Alexei Kuryakov. I don't know quite how to say that, but there it is. The new initiative focused on creating a research team to learn advanced missile technology. Now, everyone knows that North Korea has been a perennial threat to the United States and all the Western powers, frankly. And so seeing them armed even more in more sophisticated ways is a foreboding thing to take note of. And there are also things happening in Israel that make us take note of the spiritual significance. So beyond the things that we know of here on set apart land, each and every week, the Shabbat comes, the gates are closed, and the trumpets are blown. Not just the shofar, but the silver trumpets are blown here each and every week. Well, interestingly enough, I wonder if we didn't, he says what you bind is bound and what you loose is loosed. So this is interesting. First in 2,000 years, silver temple trumpets sounded on the Temple Mount. Well. We have 2 silver trumpets made, make them hammered work. Okay, so Numbers 10 verse 2. And for the first time in 2,000 years, they did blow the trumpets on the Mount of Olives, or on the Mount of the Temple Mount area, and they were done on a prayer service. And so I just thought that was an interesting little factoid. Just throw that in there because it's indicating that there are some things happening in the theater of operations, both kinetically in terms of warfare and things along that line, but also spiritual things that are being fulfilled even before our eyes. And so very important for us to be paying attention. And now we're hearing that there are tornado sirens going off in Minnesota. So keep your brethren in Minnesota in prayer. There's a lot of danger going on across the earth. And speaking of this, one of the things that I saw that was a dynamic shift, this just got reported. So this was today. And this is very interesting because we all know that allegiances and alliances are being reformed. These alliances and allegiances allow for defense arrangements, right? So what is the entire point of Ukraine attempting to join NATO? Well, wouldn't the entire point of that be that should they come under attack, then NATO would then be obligated to respond? Makes sense. And that's frankly what we've seen, and has frankly been what's been in the narrative, right? And so there's been an effort to somehow pull Ukraine into NATO. Well, turnabout seems to be fair play because here we see the Palestinians, or the Palestine is officially announcing that it will apply to join BRICS, which essentially ends up being the same thing. Following a meeting between presidents earlier this month, Palestine has announced that it will officially apply to join BRICS. Indeed, Russia's Vladimir Putin met with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas in early August. Subsequently, the latter has been invited to the 2024 BRICS summit. And so this is just in. Palestinian officials announced it will apply to join BRICS. And so this is going to, of course, affect the dynamic in the region, because part of the BRICS arrangement is joint protection. Now, again, do you understand why China and Russia are expressing more of their own opinions on the Middle East conflict? And this is going to continue as we see the hegemonic powers in the West declining in influence, financial strength, and military prowess. We're going to see other voices expressing their opinions, if you will, on the Middle East question. And this is now going to become more and more part of the foreign policy elements of this other coalition, the BRICS coalition. And so we're seeing them exert themselves as we expected they would when we saw them banding together with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, with African nations, and connecting all of those resources together. As we began to watch that, you were watching the coalition. I believe in some regards it may be in reflection to the Psalm 83 prediction, but nevertheless what we're seeing is a coalition of nations that are binding together. Now there's a bad guy in this, and we're going to start to see this bad guy emerging, and it is not necessarily one particular state, but a group of people that hide within states. And this is what ultimately is the enemy. Just as the adversary is hiding and using human shields to hide his nefarious behavior, so the same is going on in the Middle East. And in fact, Russia is now proposing, as you all remember, Russia is the president of the Security Council this month, and Russia is proposing to adopt the new UN Security Council resolution on the Middle East and a mission to the UN. In his opinion, it is precisely the manic desire of the United States to monopolize the Middle East peace process, to reshape it according to its patterns suited to Israel, that led to the dramatic consequences that we're witnessing today. And so they're throwing the previous efforts at peace in the Middle East under the bus. And that, of course, was always led by the United States in an effort to bring peace to the region. Russia proposes to the members of the UN Security Council to draft and adopt a new document on the Middle East settlement that will make it possible to stop the violence in the Gaza Strip. Russia's first deputy permanent representative to the UN, Dmitry Polyansky, said, "How much longer are we going to remain idle while American would-be mediators continue putting on a show and feeding us empty promises that their diplomatic efforts on the ground will bring speedy results?" Ooh, getting called out for fake results. So this has been a long time coming, folks. We've watched this slow burn for probably 40 years as more and more efforts were made to try and bring, quote, peace to the Middle East. But unfortunately, it has only erupted in what we see today, a two-front war manifesting everywhere around us. And as a matter of fact, Hezbollah is ready to launch a huge October 7th attack, according to this report, on Israel after 10 years of plotting and building miles of tunnels. So they now have awakened another enemy that has been preparing to do war with them for some time. The terror group recently revealed footage of their hidden tunnel network from which missiles can be launched. Hezbollah is ready to launch a huge attack on Israel after a decade of evil plotting and building a miles-long tunnel network, experts have warned. Analysts monitoring years of military activity in southern Lebanon warned that October 7th could soon look like a picnic if and when the Lebanese terrorists unleash hell. And I do believe that Israel is incredibly vulnerable when it comes to their northern border. And we're already seeing some impact as a result. And so remember that, again, this is a battle of high ground, right? So everybody remember that, because as you remember and pay attention to the reality that they have to have high ground to justify to their populations and to the world why they've done some of the actions that they've done. This is why it's critically important for us to keep an eye on the narrative, because as they try to assume high ground, as they try to take that superior moral position, that is usually justification for action. So they obviously thought themselves morally superior enough to preemptively attack Hezbollah in the north. And this is, of course, I believe, a reaction to exaggerated fear. They got things to hide. Okay, they have things to hide. And one of the things that we took note of a while back, this is not a story that we take pleasure in, but the reality is that tens of thousands of pedophiles operate in Israel every year. And this is leading to 100,000 convictions annually, which per capita is a ridiculously high number, according to an Israeli Pedophile Monitoring Association. So this is not a conspiracy theory. The article was published in the Jerusalem Post in 2020. The situation described has almost certainly worsened since then. Tens of thousands of pedophiles operate in Israel every year, leading to 100,000 convictions annually, and that is in a favorable scenario. So I do believe that judgment is coming to Israel. I do believe that, again, that's why I think there's a lot of people leaving that are emptying it out. And one of the things that we received as a word when we were there, living on the Sea of Galilee, we were there for 9 months, not 8, not 10, 9 months to start Remnant House. And the word that we received is that we had to leave because there was going to be a purge. So here we are watching. Are we watching that purge now? We don't know. We'll watch with great interest. And in the meantime, Ukraine is doing everything it can to sort of recapture this headline and grab some momentum. So it attacked Moscow, one of its largest ever drone strikes on the Russian capital. And so that was an interesting thing that developed this last week as we watched that warfare sort of unfold. Moscow says it foiled the drone volley. 11 drones over Moscow region were destroyed. No damage or casualties were reported. So this was a futile effort, but nevertheless, it was attempted. And so they literally attacked Moscow. And I think some of it is just an effort to be, sort of come off as bold and courageous. But I do believe a lot of it is a waste of time. And it's headline grabbing nonsense. And here's where the reality is. Last week, we showed a video, if you guys remember, where we showed their, forces that were going to be going to the front lines to bust through and take down Putin, right? And what did we see? We saw, this is laughable, and it is a horrible manipulation of people. And here's the reality on the ground. Okay, the Ukrainian lawmakers are tipping the hand, so they're telling us exactly what's really happening. Look at this: Ukrainian lawmaker laments that thousands defect from armed forces. Prior to that, the Ukrainian parliament has passed a bill allowing to pardon AWOL servicemen who abandon their posts for the first time if they agree to resume their military service before the pretrial begins. The assertion has become a widespread prominent in the Ukrainian armed forces, with servicemen abandoning positions in the thousands. So that's the reality. I do believe that that is more accurate and correct, given that they were rounding these people up in many cases right off the street. So I do believe that this war effort, so to speak, is winding down, regardless of what you might hear in the news. I do believe that Russia has demonstrated some restraint in handling this, but there are serious infrastructure problems for Ukraine now, which is going to start pulling on Europe. So it's going to ripple. All of these things are going to ripple economically and in every way. And but here's an example of rippling, right? Something that travels across the world. So a tactic that began in Texas, where they started taking, the unwanted guests, America's unwanted guests, right? Uninvited guests. And they started putting them on planes and buses and shipping them to other parts of the country so they could feel the impact of their policies. It was brilliant. It suddenly started causing conversations in areas that didn't have that conversation before, because suddenly they were facing the crisis right on their doorstep versus thousands of miles away where it's no big deal, right? Well, apparently the tactic has been picked up in Eastern Europe because Hungary may send migrants to Brussels to avenge the asylum fine. So several years ago, Texas had a brilliant idea to take millions of illegal immigrants that were flooding its territory as a result of policies adopted in faraway places like D.C. and bus them to places like New York and D.C., other so-called sanctuary cities, and best of all, Martha's Vineyard, where those who run New York and D.C. tend to go on vacation. The result was an immediate revulsion by the false virtue signaling crowd, which cried foul at having to suffer the consequences of their actions. Well, now it turns out Texas' idea was so good, it is now being adopted across the Atlantic, where another illegal alien invasion has been taking place for the past decade, slowly replacing the indigenous populations with millions of immigrants from northern Africa and the Middle East. Now, one European country has decided it has had enough. Hungary suggested that it might, like Texas, start transporting migrants to show up at its borders straight to Brussels. Take them right to where they're making these policies. I think that's brilliant. I personally think that's a great idea. Give them a free trip, and go on up. You want to see Brussels? I mean, they invited you. Who invited you? Oh, Brussels invited you? Oh, well, let's make sure you get right up there. Let's make sure you get front and center. Since they're the ones that invited you, right? And as I told you before, one of the things that we're watching is the reality on the ground, the reality on the ocean, that the powers that used to be are no longer the powers of today. And this is a dangerous development, Saints, as we see the saber rattling heating up. This is also the time when those in the West are not exactly the best prepared. And as a matter of fact, remember I told you guys that the Navy is not really prepared for especially a multi-front war. They're just not ready for that. And they've got beyond equipment issues. Now they've got personnel issues. And it says, according to this latest report that just came out again, updated today, the Navy could sideline 17 support ships due to manpower issues. Okay, so Military Sealift Command has drafted a plan to remove the crews from 17 naval support ships due to a lack of qualified mariners to operate the vessels across the Navy. And the news has learned the Force Generation Reset identified 2 Lewis and Clark replenishment ships, 1 fleet oiler, a dozen spearheaded class expeditionary fast transports, and 2 forward deployed Navy expeditionary sea bases that would enter a extended maintenance period and have their crews retasked to other ships. Now, this tells me they're expecting conflict. They're taking their assets that can't be put into a war footing and removing them and putting them on assets that can be put into a war footing. Anybody want to take a guess at what that might portend? Why would they be doing that right now? What are they anticipating? Well, I do believe that you all are wise enough to figure that out. And as a matter of fact, we're seeing evidence in this last week that Russian drones were spotted over nuclear plants in NATO countries. So again, we're being brought, I don't know if we're going to actually go over this edge, but we're certainly being brought to the edge. Germany is investigating drone flights suspected to be Russian surveillance drones flying over key nuclear infrastructure in the north of the country. The drones, which have not yet been identified, have been spotted flying over nuclear power facilities in Brunsbüttel, a city north of Hamburg, north of the coast of the North Sea, according to a German newspaper. And so we're seeing the saber rattling changing in its dimensions and scope. And again, we never know when these things may go live. So this is why it's important for us to always be sober and vigilant. One of the ways in which this war has already gone live, and all of us have felt this, is in our pocketbooks, at the grocery store, in our supply chains. All of us have been impacted by the conflicts that have erupted globally because, as throughout the earth, rather, because you know that once these countries start having sour relations, that affects trade, that affects the acceptance of each other's currencies, that affects a lot of infrastructure, and that ripple effect will begin to impact the West in dramatic ways. You've already begun to feel some of it. You're about to feel more. This news just came out from Canada, which is part of the North American Trade Alliance, if you will. And Canada's railway work stoppage begins, threatening U.S. supply chains. That's just this week. Okay, the Canadian Railway, National Railway, and Canadian Pacific Kansas City announced the lockout of their Canadian workers on Thursday after failed labor talks, resulting in a shutdown of their rail networks in the country. So they fed workers with an entitlement issue, and at the same time fed government or management with greed and avarice. So you've got divides that are growing bigger and bigger. The decision, confirmed by the Teamsters Union, representing close to 10,000 workers at the companies, sets the stage for an unprecedented rail stoppage. Did you catch that? Unprecedented. What does that mean? It means it's never happened before. That could badly damage the Canadian economy and have significant effect on cross-border trade with the United States. You think that's going to have an impact? What do you think, folks? You think that's going to have an impact on trade? You bet. It's most definitely going to have an impact on trade. I'll tell you another thing that's going to have an impact on trade. And we're grateful if they resolve these issues. But again, these are things that are constantly, and I see an update here. Someone says it's been resolved. That's fantastic news. But we have other disruptions, and what we're watching is the pattern. The pattern is what's disturbing to me, because we watched so many things get destroyed over the last several years, and so it is good to hear if they do resolve those things. Thank you, LT Nixon, for that update. Possible cyber attack leads to outages at the port of Seattle and SeaTac Airport. So here again, we're seeing attacks or efforts to cause disruption to normal life in the West. The Port of Seattle said some internet and web-based time for a fix. So this came out a couple of days ago. This was updated a couple of days ago. The Port of Seattle, which includes Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, is experiencing outages that may have been caused by a cyber attack. That is an external effort, port officials said on Saturday. The outages are impacting internet and web-based systems. So We're seeing a lot of effort to make people feel the disruption. And again, we're always grateful when we see those things are resolved, but nevertheless, they seem to constantly be happening. We seem to always be dealing with something that's either threatening infrastructure, destroyed infrastructure, or delaying the repair of infrastructure. So again, setting up for damage to come down the road. And speaking of infrastructure, one of the things everyone needs is employment, and that keeps the economy running. Well, we were told some outstanding numbers just a little while ago. You guys remember these updates you were getting, and it was just outstanding job reports, and we were all looking at a little suspiciously. And sure enough, the big lie, 818,000 jobs that Joe and Kamala, according to the Gateway Pundit, claim to have created aren't actually there. Largest downward revision to employment in 15 years. So a revision report. They come out, they tell this lie, exaggerating and embellishing, and then later on they come and correct the data, and all super quiet. The 818,000 jobs that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden claim to have, quote, created over the last year aren't actually there. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were cooking the books the whole time and lying to the American people. This is the Gateway Pundit, guys. This is not us saying it. The non-farm payroll growth between April 23 and March 24 was revised down, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said on Wednesday. So again, what do? They do these hype jobs. They do these pump fakes. Tell everybody it's great, which is basically a pump and dump. I don't know how that's any different. To me, you're dealing with basically a pump and dump. And then once people figure it out, they come on and say, oh, well, yes, maybe things weren't quite as good as we thought. If that pump and dump is done over an election period, that could dramatically impact people's choices, and then find out after the fact that, oh, well, we have to revise these numbers. Folks, this corruption has to end, and we need to continue to intercede that light will continue to shine in these dark places, because this is what's going to continue to cause problems in the country. And it's definitely impacted the economy with all these different policies that are artificial impacts, like we were just seeing in Hungary, where they now have to deal with a migrant problem that they weren't planning on, they didn't ask for. And so this is causing economic difficulties on top of an already sluggish or receding economy in whatever particular part of the world you happen to be. And here we have 100 students without bus service, as Massachusetts is having to play the political game, right? So they've got to, stay on the certain side of the aisle and all that nonsense. Meanwhile, real services for real citizens who pay real taxes are not being taken care of. Boston area superintendent denies an influx of migrants is to blame, but parents and students are thinking something else. Parents and students of a school district outside of Boston were informed last week that they would be without school bus service, citing a lack of funding and a shortage of buses. Okay? And, of course, what we later find out is, of course, they're using it for the migrants, and they're using it for that purpose. And so do you blame the citizens in a certain particular area for feeling a little bit, I don't know, betrayed? Having worked, dedicated their lives, many of them decades of service to these pyramid builders, only to be discarded for the newest iteration, the newest guys coming in. And so it's not just here, saints, it's all over the earth. We're seeing the failure of every form of government or governing the mind or mind control that has ever been invented, and all of it will fail for the sake of the kingdom. We know that the kingdom prevails, that the kingdom of Elohim is the only government form that will survive. And as the scripture tells us in the book of Isaiah, the government shall be upon his shoulders. So even the countries that, everybody was hearing about, China's going to take over, right? China's got its own problems. Okay, China's got its own problems. Steel mill profits collapse. Well, if they're not selling stuff in Seattle, they're not selling a bunch of stuff to us Americans, right? Because suddenly things are slowing down. Well, then that's going to affect them too, isn't it? The global commodities market peaked in early 2022 and stumbled ever since. China's property sector remains in a multi-year slump, resulting in soft demand for base metals like iron ore and copper. If you're not building, that's not going to happen. Last week, Baiwo Steel Group chairman Hu Wangming warned that the economic conditions in the world's second largest economy felt like a harsh winter. I do believe that the meteoric rise of China was in large part due to the entitled consumer mentality of the West. That entitlement mentality and that excess spending has been badly shaken in the West. So I think that's also rippling. And consequently, they're not having the surplus that they were having in the past. In addition, I do believe that people are starting to ask harder questions on their investment strategies when they're putting up these fake buildings and so forth. So China was for a long time building, if you remember, those ghost cities, okay, and building cities out in the middle of nowhere. There was nobody living there. Well, how do you know that's putting a demand on all the materials as if you're building for real, for real, right? So what happens when you can't afford to keep building ghost cities? Well, that demand starts to drop. So all the industries that were built with the intention of supporting that are now, of course, suffering economically. So that's going to continue to happen. And that, frankly, is something that we knew was going to occur. But, we have to also realize that these things have to play out. As the scripture told us, we would see a man's daily wages would be needed just to feed himself, an entire day's wages just to feed himself. So we're seeing that. And again, we're also watching the earth reacting to things. Here we have another earthquake that appears over in Hawaii, rattles Hawaii as the islands brace for tropical trouble. And this was just this last week. The earthquake comes as a state braces for tropical trouble from two systems over the eastern Pacific Ocean heading toward the island. So they have weather inbound, and they also had earthquake activity. And of course, everybody that's paying attention to people like Dutch Sense gotta hang out with Dutch Sense. You're going to see that this earthquake activity is unprecedented, and it's reached a new level. This is something Messiah warned us, that earthquakes would rise, and that would be in diverse places. A magnitude 4.7 earthquake hit 28 miles away from Hilo, and on Thursday, about 9 miles south of Fern Forest in the south flank of Kolea volcano in Hawaii. It's commonly called the Big Island. And so that is news for us, because we need to know that there's going to be, that could be volcanic activity starting to stir up in Hawaii for all we know. We've certainly seen plenty of other places that erupted, right? So we're seeing, again, the earth reacting. Judgments are falling, right? These are the kinds of things that we unfortunately are going to keep seeing right here in Arizona. We unfortunately had some tragedy. Now we've been getting very soft, gentle rain here to continue to add to our annual total as our atmosphere changes. But in other parts of the state, well, that rain came as a shock to some people. And 100 people were rescued from Havasu Creek after floods left tourists trapped. But no word on missing hiker Shanoa Nickerson. Unfortunately, I believe that this person has passed. So there definite effects happening in the earth. And again, this is the monsoon season here in Arizona. So, you will see these flash floods and these things happening. But I did think that was coincidental because, again, we are in Arizona, and what we're experiencing is gentle rain. We're not getting any of these floods or heavy downpourings. We get rain. We continue to get rain, unusual levels of rain, but it's gentle. So that's good to know, and a comparative, if you will. In some of this, I want to say turbulence that we're seeing in the world today. Here's an economic story that, again, I always watch these other countries, especially Western countries, when things like this occur, because it's almost as if they're using these other places as sort of a test of some of their ideas, and chaos ensues in Australia as thousands of Aussies are locked out of their bank accounts. Does this seem to you that Australia seems to get a lot of heavy-handed stuff happening over there? Mobile and internet services are down. Banks were aware of issue and say it's now fixed, but nevertheless, kind of interesting to see these things constantly happening. Bank customers have been struck by major tech outage impacting its internet, mobile, and desktop banking services. More than 1,900 complaints were made to tech monitoring website Down Detector, and of course they brought it back up. But you got to wonder. They talked about this hacking going on in Tacoma, right? For all of that, and now you're seeing these things going down. Are we seeing more aggressive hacking and more aggressive interruption of service as a result of a different kind of warfare, a different way to attack a country that isn't necessarily using the weapons that are conventional? So it is something that we are noting. It's a pattern that we continue to see. And confirming those revised numbers for employment is this NBC News report that indicates that more than 28% of Americans are searching for new jobs. That's the highest rate in a decade. People's fears of losing their jobs at the highest point in a New York Fed survey 10-year history, even as the unemployment rate technically, or with their fudge numbers, according to them, is supposed to be low. A new labor market survey shows Americans have rarely felt more in need of new job opportunities. What's happening? Babylon is falling. They're not building pyramids like they used to. And they no longer need slaves like they used to. And so, and as people are awakening and litigating differently and calling banking into question, calling mortgages into question, calling the legitimacy of many things into question, this is causing collapse. It's also causing those in the know to anticipate, when will the general public finally wake up to the ruse that has been played upon them using admiralty law and all these various legal tricks. And I think they're starting to realize that there's only so much time before they will be done. Okay? And so just understand that it is a reality that we are in this battle of mind. And again, government is mind control. Apple juice, this is something that, another element that we have to be aware of in this hour. And it's a very important thing that we keep seeing a narrative continue to be touched by this issue. And this keeps going on over and over again. Yes, if you continue to be distracting, will not just put you in timeout, will time out you permanently. And so apple juice being sold in Walmart is now being recalled over fears it contains arsenic. We've been watching this unfold. We've been watching the constant dripping into the narrative of things like this, that you have to be worried about the apple juice, you have to be worried about what was it last week, the cucumbers. And each week we see more and more put into the narrative that if it isn't directly causing a recall, it's causing fear. And so this is what we continue to keep note of. And so don't you be afraid, because I believe a lot of this is just a psyop. But nevertheless, it's almost like they've got 52 stories and they want to make sure every week at least one of them get out there. Okay. Walmart has recalled more than 9,500 cases of apple juice, which probably should never have made it out there to begin with, over fears that it could contain arsenic. The Food and Drug Administration announced that the retailer's Great Value brand 6-pack, 8-ounce apple juice PET plastic bottles have elevated levels of inorganic arsenic in them. All right. Once again, folks, some of this stuff is hype beyond words. Did you know that if you looked at the apple seed itself, did you know that the scripture says in Genesis chapter 1 that the seed is for meat, and that in fact it does have arsenic in it? The apple seed does, in fact, have arsenic. It's also a killer, a disease killer. Healthy cells can handle that. The unhealthy cells cannot. But it is interesting how they can use almost anything to cause fear and panic. So that's like saying we're recalling apples. Why? We discovered that the seeds inside have arsenic. You see what I mean? How information can be manipulated and twisted and shared in such a way so as to create a result or a reaction that isn't, frankly, edifying. And so this is one of the ways I believe that they are attacking, and they are attacking every which way they can. One of the other ways that I do believe we need to be very careful, this to me portends the major mark of the beast implementation things, is when they're trying to make you subject to technology. So something that they built in a lab and they gave a voice to, and then they want to put it out with a badge and tell you, you have to be subject to it. It has authority over you. And I want to tell you in the strongest terms that everyone who in the sound of my voice needs to reject that notion. There is no piece of equipment. There's no lights and clockwork that somebody plugged in or put a battery in that has authority over you. But that's exactly the notion they're trying to get people to buy into. And in fact, now we're seeing, you think the AI thing is going away? No, it's just getting more and more weird. It's just getting odd. Okay. The tech takeover, their plans for AI to run a city, as a mayoral candidate insists the VicBot would be good for democracy and host some meet and greet. Expects to see more AI human duos in the ballot in the future, the candidate says. Are you kidding me? Artificial intelligence, they want to be mayor. Okay, they want the AI to be the mayor. Artificial intelligence is officially run for office. You can't do that because they can't swear an oath of office. Okay, an oath of office. See, they're doing this workaround right now. They're laying all kinds of ways to get around the oath of office that you're all going to find out sooner or later. You're going to find out they don't have them, and as a result, they're all imposters and they're masquerading or impersonating officials. Without an oath of office, you're an impersonator. Chat GPT is his favorite AI, he says, and is the platform he chose to build his running mate for the mayor election in Cheyenne, Wyoming this summer. Okay, this isn't some faraway place or some goof. This is Wyoming. Okay, this is right here in the good old USA. So if you think this is a light matter, you are mistaken. This is something that we have to be very careful about because we're seeing more and more efforts to make you subject to technology. Why would they need to do that? I'm going to tell you why, point blank. They have a massive legal dilemma on their hands when they modified people. And those people now don't have actual rights the same as you do. This is going to create a legal dilemma down the road. It may not be today, may not be tomorrow, but it's coming. And when they test that, they're going to find out you have two classes of beings now. You've had a separation. So making you subject to technology or to other non-man or woman, right? Something other than a man or a woman in Earth, that's new. That's something since when are you literally imprisonable, chargeable, can be charged with an offense by technology, by a robot? This has been an effort since RoboCop and others to try to get it into your head that there's nothing wrong with that. There's some major things wrong with that. You are sovereigns. You build technology to serve you, not to govern you. Okay? You build technology to serve you, to do things for you, like mow your lawn or heat your food. You don't build a piece of technology that then come and tell you what to do. All right? So this is where they're trying to cross this line, and people are not noticing that they're crossing. They're doing it in clever ways, and it is unacceptable. So just keep that in mind. That is something that we're going to continue to see efforts to do. And again, they do these things. I think some of these things they do just to see if there's going to be a reaction, kind of like this thing. Houston area. Has Houston not figured it out yet? Have they not hit by enough things? Houston just is asking for it, aren't they? Houston area Hindu temple unveils a massive monkey god sculpture. Claim statue is third tallest in the U.S. Look at this nonsense. I don't even have words for how crazy some of this is going on right here. And this speaks to the Babylonian statue of Nebuchadnezzar, right? And here we got a monkey god, 90 foot tall, third tallest statue in America. Poof, this comes out of nowhere. And so here we have these kinds of things being done is a literal thumbing the nose at Elohim, a true provocation and insult to his sovereignty. And honestly, I do believe a petition for judgment. You're literally asking for judgment to land upon the nation. And speaking of judgment, we've been watching these stories. These don't give me any pleasure, but these churches continue to get caught in these scandals, one after another. Here, the Gateway Church now is facing new lawsuit from a woman who alleges she was abused. What is with this early teen age, 13 and 14 years old? My goodness. Okay, Gateway Church in Southlake, Texas is facing a new lawsuit from a woman who alleges she was groomed and sexually abused at the age of 13 by an older participant in a youth group hosted by the church at King's University beginning in 2016. And so now they're suing the churches. She alleged that Snyder, who's now 25 and imprisoned for sexual assault of a child in a separate case, convict her that it was God's will that she submit to him as a female. Oh boy. And you can read some of this stuff is really hard to read, folks, because again, you're seeing some of the psychosis. And we see this, we've seen these things in other parts of the world, but when you have a breakdown of the sound mind, when you've rejected the Torah, the commandments of Elohim, and you've moved away from absolutes into subjective thinking, which is something they started trying to get everyone into in the 80s. And they moved everyone into this subjective thinking where, well, it might not be wrong in this situation. No, that wrong is wrong, right is right, black and white. The commandments are what they are. But in a world of subjective thinking, 2 and 2 don't always equal 4. And so you're having conversations with people trying to use logic, trying to use your sound mind. When you review a matter, you say, well, here it is. My sound mind is looking at this. There's really no way around it. Here's what it says, or here's what we found. And then you talk to people who do not have absolutes. And as a result, they argue with you and debate with you with things that are right in front of them. And you're wondering, how is that possible? Well, frankly, what you're seeing is advanced levels of witchcraft that has been foisted over all of the earth. And we know this because the scripture tells us that the whole of the earth would come under the sway of the wicked one, which is what witchcraft does. It puts people under the sway of the wicked one. And so across the earth today, what we're watching is systematic witchcraft being used on entire groups of people who are unsuspecting and unaware of the error of Balaam. And because they don't know what that error is, they continue to curse themselves and open doors for contamination. All the more reason why we need you all as the remnant to be a sober group who not only go before Elohim to be cleansed of any unrighteousness in your own life, according to the scripture, if you confess your sin, he is faithful and just to forgive you and cleanse you of unrighteousness. That means you can then be a vessel, a person who can help those who have lost their way. They're lost because they've forgotten the Elohim of all creation. And so this dangerous time that you find yourself in is not just debating on social media or having not so pleasant interactions with relatives. This is getting hot, and more energy is being placed in creating conflict and driving groups apart. So all the more reason why we encourage you continually to find your fold. Find the place that Elohim has for you. Get there and be found faithful. Staying in these places that already clearly have judgment on them or manifesting upon them is folly. Wisdom sees trouble afar off and hides oneself. Doesn't just sit there waiting for it to hit. And so our encouragement to all of you is to continue to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, his Zedakah, his right ways of doing and being right, that you would finish well in this hour. Well, that's tonight's report. I pray this broadcast has been a barakah to you. May Elohim bless each and every one of you. Good night.